Imagine for a moment that your mind is a garden you inherited, not one you chose to plant, a space where flowers you love have grown, but also weeds you never wanted. Some sprouted from words spoken out loud, others from silences heavy with fear. There were seeds that fell there when you were still too small to understand, too small to say, "This doesn't belong to me." And yet, they stayed, they grew, and today, they bloom as invisible blocks, as fears that no longer make sense but continue pulsing, as self-sabotage that appears at the exact moment you try to move forward, as if a part of you had stopped in time, even though everything around you has already changed. Maybe you're going through a moment in which you deeply long for change, a new phase, a new life. Maybe you're making affirmations, visualizations, prayers, but something seems unresponsive, as if the universe hears you, and at the same time doesn't really listen. And that hurts, because there is sincere effort, there is will, there is surrender, and still, there seems to be an invisible block, a weight that insists on staying, a door that won't open. Bruce Lipton helps us understand why. According to him, until the age of 7, we live in a hypnotic state. The brain operates predominantly in theta waves, as if it were recording everything, without filters, without questioning, just absorbing. And it's during this time that our deepest beliefs are installed, not only by the words we were told, but by the emotions we felt while listening, by the environment, the tone of voice, the gestures, the silences. Most of what we believe about ourselves, about love, about money, about life, was programmed before we even knew what choice was. And the most striking fact, Lipton states that more than 95% of our behavior is commanded by the subconscious. What does this mean? That it is not your conscious will that creates your reality. It is your vibrational autopilot. It is what you feel without realizing it. It is the hidden programming that dictates your decisions, your feelings, your daily vibration. You may desire something with all your soul and still be silently sabotaged by beliefs that live beneath the surface. Epigenetics, a field Bruce Lipton also explores deeply, shows us that it is not genes that control our lives, but rather the beliefs that activate or deactivate those genes. Crystallized emotions, repeated thoughts, internal states of fear or hope. All of this directly influences the biology of our body, and the body responds. The body always responds, with illness or with healing, with contraction or with expansion, with vital energy or with exhaustion. Joe Dispenza, in turn, deepens this understanding by revealing that the electromagnetic field of our heart and brain is in constant transformation. It is shaped by the combination of thought and emotion, and this field, which you emit every day, creates resonance with the quantum field around you. In other words, your beliefs create the quality of your frequency, and your frequency creates your reality. It's as if the universe delivers not what you say you want, but what your body believes to be true. That's why, so often, repeating an affirmation is not enough. It is necessary to change the vibrational root of the belief that still lives in the unconscious. It is necessary to return to the garden, look at the soil, and recognize the seeds that were sown there without your awareness. Because what blooms today is a consequence of what was planted yesterday, even if you didn't notice. But there is something profoundly liberating in knowing this. If beliefs were programmed, they can be reprogrammed. If the unconscious was trained to fear, to hide, to shrink, it can be re-educated to trust, to expand, to recognize itself as a creative part of life. This doesn't happen by brute force. It doesn't happen through pressure. It happens through presence, through kindness, through awareness. And if, for a moment, you can embrace this idea as a new seed, one you choose today to plant for yourself, perhaps everything will begin to change. Slowly, deeply, truly, because your mind really is like a garden, and now it is waiting for you. Have you ever felt like you're trying hard to maintain positive thoughts, but something inside you seems to pull in the opposite direction? as if there were an inner noise distorting your vibration, even when your intention is good. This happens to more people than you might imagine, and often, without them understanding why. Many are trying to vibrate love, abundance, healing, but deep in their chest, they still carry the pain of not feeling enough, the fear of failing again, the guilt that was never processed, the shame that was silenced. These feelings are not signs of weakness. They are vibrational echoes of beliefs that weren't born today. They were inherited, absorbed, repeated, beliefs that told us what we could or could not be, that shaped the way we look at the world and, more deeply, the way we look within ourselves. Bruce Lipton describes this phenomenon clearly. The disconnection between what we consciously desire and what we unconsciously believe creates a fragmented vibrational field. And this fragmented field sends mixed signals to the universe. It's like trying to move forward with one foot on the accelerator and the other on the brake. This generates exhaustion, frustration, doubts, and over time, a deep sense of blockage. Do you feel like you're trying everything, but the results remain the same? Maybe it's not a lack of effort. Maybe it's simply a conflict of frequency. While your conscious mind declares, "I can," your subconscious vibrates, "I don't deserve it." And that vibration carries weight. It reverberates through every cell, every choice, every encounter. In this scenario, self-sabotage doesn't appear as a visible enemy. It comes disguised as caution, as "it's not the right time," as "I'm not sure." But behind it, there is almost always a belief planted long ago, a phrase or unprocessed emotion that still commands the system. It's as if you were trying to paint a new picture, but the canvas is still stained with the colors of the past. That's why the path is not to fight against the symptoms. It's not to force the body to feel what it doesn't yet feel. It's to go to the root, because the root doesn't lie. It holds the origin of the vibration. And when the root is touched with awareness, something begins to transform, not by force, but by realignment. When you realize this, you begin to look at your story with more compassion. You understand that not everything that limits you today is your fault, but rather the consequence of a vibration that was programmed when you didn't yet know how to choose. And this awareness, in itself, is already the beginning of freedom. Not everything you feel is yours. Not every thought that passes through your mind was born from your essence. Many of the ideas that now inhabit your consciousness were absorbed from the environment in which you grew up, as if they were invisible particles of belief floating in the air. They entered you before you knew how to question, before you knew how to discern. When we are children, we live in a state of total openness. We observe, we listen, we feel, and everything around us becomes a reference for what is right, possible, desirable, or dangerous, wrong, unattainable. The look of another, the absence of affection, constant criticism, the fear of adults, silent judgments, all of this becomes an internal script, and what was not said in words was felt in vibration. Bruce Lipton shows that cells respond to their environment. In a toxic environment, they contract. In a nurturing environment, they expand. The mind works the same way. If the environment was marked by insecurity, scarcity, comparison, fear of making mistakes, your consciousness may have learned that living fully is risky, that being seen is dangerous, that growing means losing love. Many still carry this programming today, not out of choice, but out of loyalty, out of repetition, out of unconscious inertia. And so, even in adulthood, they keep seeking approval. They feel small in the face of others' achievements. They measure their worth with the ruler of comparison. But inside, there is an unhealed wound, never having felt fully accepted for simply being who they are. This vibrational virus of comparison fragments identity. It makes you want to evolve, yet feel guilty when you grow, as if, by prospering, you were betraying something or someone from your past, as if you were saying no to a part of your story. But there is a path of reconciliation, and it begins with symbolic awareness. Imagine your mind is like a movie, and in that movie there are scenes from your childhood that you still watch in silence. Maybe you don't even realize it, but those scenes are looping inside you. They determine the ending you believe you deserve. They shape the roles you think you must play. They write lines you still repeat today without even knowing where they came from. It is possible to rewrite that script. It is possible to choose a new internal narrative, not to erase what happened, but to give it a new vibrational meaning. Because deep down, you are not the scene you lived. You are the author who can choose how it ends. And when you begin to remember this, the environment stops being an emotional prison and becomes only an old setting, one that no longer needs to define you. There is a silent hope behind every positive affirmation. When you say, "I am enough," "I am loved," "I am prosperous," there is a genuine desire for healing, for rebuilding, for rebirth. But often, there is also an empty space between the words spoken and what the body truly feels. And it is in this space that the misalignment lives. Affirmations have power, but that power only manifests when the emotion that accompanies them is real. When the body believes too, when the mind doesn't need to shout to convince the heart. And for that to happen, more is needed than simply repeating phrases. It requires reintegrating internal experiences, because the body has memory, and it holds not only the events themselves, but the emotional vibration of each one. Bruce Lipton reminds us, emotion is the cement of subconscious programming. If you learn through pain that the world is not safe, your nervous system recorded that pattern as a biological truth. And that record vibrates silently within you, even when consciously you say the opposite. That's why saying "I am prosperous" may have no effect if, deep down, there is tension in your chest every time you think about money. Saying "I am loved" may feel empty if your body still carries the echo of abandonment. The problem is not the phrase, but the absence of vibrational coherence. And coherence is when thought, emotion, and sensation walk together. When what you think is in harmony with what you feel and with what you vibrate. Joe Dispenza offers us a path. He says it is necessary to feel the emotion of the new reality before it manifests. This means creation begins from the inside out, that it is not circumstance that generates feeling. It is feeling that shapes circumstance. The quantum field responds to the vibration of your internal state, and this internal state is stronger than any phrase spoken mechanically. There is a way to create this coherence, and it begins with the integration of all the senses. Imagine yourself declaring a new belief, not only with words, but with your whole body, breathing deeply, touching your heart, feeling, even for just a few seconds, what it would be like to live the reality you desire. Visualizing clearly, feeling truthfully, remaining there for a few moments, as if that new version of yourself were already alive within you. This is multisensory reconnection, a direct portal of access between mind, emotion, and body. A simple yet profound practice, because it does not try to convince. It allows, it embraces, it vibrates. And in that space where everything vibrates in unison, thought, feeling, breath, intention, the field begins to respond, not by magic, but by resonance. Because external reality is always an echo of what is silently vibrating within you. There are moments when we feel like we're spinning in circles, living the same situations with different faces. Something inside us keeps repeating, as if it were stuck in time. And no matter how much life changes, no matter how much the scenarios transform, there it is again. The fear that paralyzes, the doubt that returns, the emptiness that insists. When this happens, there is almost always a limiting belief sustaining that repetition. An unquestioned truth, an old idea disguised as identity. But every belief has a point of origin, a moment when it was planted, an instant when, perhaps without realizing it, you absorbed an idea about yourself and accepted it as truth. That idea settled silently, repeated mentally, crystallized emotionally, until it became a lens through which you see life. That's why transformation begins with a gesture of presence, a gesture that invites you to look within, with honesty and gentleness. not to judge what you feel, but to recognize the pattern that hurts the most. What is the emotion that keeps repeating? What is the thought that comes with that emotion? What is the story you keep telling yourself, even when everything in you longs to change? The first step is vibrational identification, observing which emotion most limits your flow of energy. Maybe it's guilt, maybe the feeling of unworthiness, maybe anger disguised as indifference. Look at what hurts with eyes of curiosity, not blame. Naming the emotion is already the beginning of dissolving its power. The second step is accessing the symbolic origin. At what moment was this belief planted? Who was the first voice that made you believe you couldn't? Sometimes it isn't an exact phrase. It's a look, an absence, a comparison, an emotion you lived through and carried as truth ever since. Recognizing that point of origin is not about reliving the pain, but illuminating the darkness. It's like returning to the original scene with the awareness you have today. The third step is experiential rewriting. This is the moment when you stop being the victim of the story and become the author of a new inner narrative. Imagine yourself in that same situation, but now with a new emotional response. Visualize your freest, most conscious, most deserving version acting differently. Feel that new emotion in your body. Breathe with it. Touch your chest. Allow yourself for a few seconds to be fully aligned with the new belief you wish to install. This is not just imagination. This is spiritual neuroplasticity. It is the creation of new pathways in the brain. It is the activation of new internal connections. It is the field responding to your coherent vibration and no longer to the old cycle of unconscious repetition. Practice this for 7 days, not as an effort, but as a ritual of reconnection, as a reunion with the version of you that has always existed, but was hidden beneath the layers of old programming. Little by little, you will begin to notice small changes, not because the outside world has transformed, but because inside, you have started to vibrate differently, and everything in the universe responds to the vibration with which you treat yourself. Sometimes it feels like we're trapped in a pattern, in a pain, in a cycle that keeps repeating, and no matter how hard we try to escape, it always seems to pull us back, as if invisible walls surrounded us, as if there were a hidden force preventing expansion, and this can make us believe there is something within us that doesn't work. Something broken, defective, limited by nature. But this prison, most of the time, isn't real. It was built with beliefs, brick by brick. Beliefs that told you that you weren't enough, that you couldn't make mistakes, that you had to please others to be accepted, that you didn't deserve to go too far, that it was better to settle for less, that it was dangerous to shine. These phrases, these ideas, these emotional memories created the inner bars that still define your freedom today. Bruce Lipton calls this process the reprogramming of perception. He shows us that it is not the external reality that limits us. It is the way we perceive it. When you change the lens, everything you see changes. The prison is still there, but now you realize the door was never locked. You had simply forgotten to try opening it. It's as if a part of you had learned very early on that it wasn't worth trying, that desiring didn't matter, that trusting wasn't safe, and that part, with good intentions, created protective mechanisms. But over time, those protections became traps. They keep you where it's safe, but not where life truly happens. And here lies the deepest truth. You don't need to break any divine law to free yourself, because there is no punishment for growing. There is no mistake in prospering. There is no sin in loving yourself. What exists is a collective hypnosis, a repetition of inherited pains disguised as absolute truths. But they are not. The key is to notice, to question, to honestly ask yourself, where does this limitation I carry come from? Is it really mine? Or was it placed in me before I knew how to say, this doesn't represent me? When you begin to see these beliefs as constructions, not as destiny, something dissolves. The inner walls start to crack. Light enters through the openings. And then one day you look clearly at the prison door. and realize it's only a jar, waiting for your conscious touch to open. You are not breaking the laws of the universe when you set yourself free. You are, in fact, realigning with the truth that has always been yours. You were born free. Everything that came after can be unlearned, because at the core, what binds you is not who you are. It's what you were taught to believe. Every limiting belief is a lens, and every lens can be changed. What today seems insurmountable is often just a perspective repeated so many times that it began to feel like reality, but it isn't. It isn't the only possible reality. It isn't the absolute truth about you. It is simply the story you learned to tell, even with your body, with your gestures, with your gaze. Bruce Lipton shows us that biology responds to perception. This changes everything, because if the body reacts to what you believe, then it can also transform when you change the way you see yourself. Healing, expansion, freedom, all of them begin with a different perception of yourself. A perception that doesn't come from the logical mind. It comes from the heart that awakens, from the soul that remembers. Neville Goddard, with his timeless wisdom, reminds us, feeling is the secret. It isn't enough to say, you must feel it as true. And this feeling doesn't arise from effort. It arises from an encounter with something that already exists within you, waiting to be remembered. It's like touching a sacred memory, the memory of who you were before all the wounds, before the doubts, before the masks. And then, a new vibration begins to settle in. Not as a forced idea, but as a natural frequency, like a melody that has always been within you, but was muffled by the noise of inherited beliefs. And it is in this moment of reconnection that transformation happens, silent but real, deep but light, without empty promises, without instant magic, just truth vibrating in coherence. Liberation does not require struggle. It requires presence. It requires an honest gaze, a courageous dive, a conscious choice to no longer repeat what hurts. Because when you shine light on a belief, it loses the power to control you in the dark. Maybe you don't need to become someone new. Maybe all you need right now is to remember who you were before the chains, before the voices that said, you can't, before the looks that made you shrink, before the comparisons that made you doubt your own light. You were born whole, free, vibrant. The rest was learned and can be unlearned. Life does not demand that you fight against yourself. It only invites you to come home, to recognize that the key has always been inside. And that, by changing your vibration, you are not only healing yourself, you are healing an entire field of consciousness. And what if the pain you feel today is, in fact, the deepest call for this return? What if this discomfort is only the signal that you are already ready to remember who you are?